And he reaches over, and he actually grabs me by the back of the neck on national TV. He reaches over and grabs, puts his hand on the back of my neck, and he says, "If you don't cut that out, you'll go home in an ambulance." Which, first of all, doesn't make sense because you don't go home in ambulances. And this is the punchline. So this is all the build-up. The punchline is that after this happens, right? This is called, technically as a lawyer, this is called an assault and battery, right? When someone threatens you and puts their hands on you, this is called an assault and battery. So this happens, and it's on national TV live, right? And the entire panel, all of them, swivel on me and say, "How dare you offend Zoe that way? You knew what you were saying was offensive. How dare you offend Zoe that way?" And that's when, on the spur of the moment, I came up with my catchphrase, "Facts don't care about your feelings," right? But the point was this. The idea was that I had said something offensive, and therefore it was okay for Zoe Tour to grab me by the back of the neck. And by the way, threatened me as he was leaving the studio, that he'd meet me in the parking lot and wanted to fight, which would have been a weird fight. And then go on Twitter and state that he wanted to curb stomp me, all of which I have to say was deeply unladylike behavior. But the point is, again, that the idea that you can respond to verbiage with violence is a very problematic situation for everybody in the country. Because you can think I'm a jerk, that's fine. A lot of people do, that's fine. You know, in LA, you know, I have my family, and then, you know, 20 million other people who hate my guts. That's all right. You can think that I'm terrible. That's okay. What you can't do is act in physical violence, because the basis of the First Amendment is that you don't get to do this, right? That in a civilized society, if you don't like what I'm saying, tough. You don't have to care what I'm saying. You can think I'm full of it. That's okay. You don't get to act out with violence. Microaggression culture is precisely the idea that you do get to act out with violence, that if you're offended, you call the cops. So University of Missouri, where I spoke about, that's about 5 months ago, when I spoke at University of Missouri, when they were in the midst of their uproar, the police had actually issued a notice to the students that if they were offended by anything, they ought to call the police. If they heard an offensive statement, they ought to call the police. This is the essence of fascism. You hurt my feelings, I'm calling the guys with the guns. Right? That's fascism. And this is the problem. It's totalitarian, and this is why campuses have become more and more totalitarian. And so once you've done the trigger warnings and you've created this microaggression culture, now you've finally created your little safe space. Right? Your little safe space, that cocoon, that warm special cocoon that makes you feel all good about yourself. Well, the problem is this. It turns out America actually is a safe space. It just doesn't mean you feel good about it. Right? Safe spaces, the way the left wants it, are fascist spaces. They're spaces where your opinion is not allowed if you disagree. This is why, by the way, I encourage people who are on the left and who disagree to stick around, because I prefer free speech spaces. I prefer spaces where we have conversations, even if we disagree, as opposed to fascist spaces where people are forcibly banned because they disagree. And it's taken to absurd extremes. The University of Missouri, as I mentioned, in the midst of all of that racial conflagration, the black students at University of Missouri actually tried to, and they succeeded in, banning white students from their safe spaces. White students who agreed with them. Not protesters, white students who agreed with them. They said they didn't feel safe if there were white students there. They said that they wanted a space that you might call separate, but also equal. Right? It was a space that the KKK would have very much enjoyed. And the KKK and Black Lives Matter in this particular iteration, they were on exactly the same side. They wanted a safe space where nobody disagreed and everybody was exactly of the same race. There was no miscegenation. It was just a wonderful Jim Crow situation. When you create these situations, when you create these safe spaces, here's the biggest problem of all. We're now creating an entire generation of morally stunted idiots. Okay, we're creating an entire, these snowflakes are going to melt when they get out into the real world. Okay, you are being made into insane people by all of this. Jonathan Haidt, who's a psychologist at New York University, he says, quote, "The recent collegiate trend of uncovering allegedly racist, sexist, classist, or otherwise discriminatory microaggressions doesn't incidentally teach students to focus on small or accidental slights. Its purpose is to get students to focus on them and then relabel the people who have made such remarks as aggressors," right? It makes people aggressive. And he says it's the opposite of what psychologists actually do when they have people who are depressed or upset. You're tough for the psych majors in the room. Right? You'll know this term, it's cognitive behavioral therapy. If somebody is having a chain of thoughts that lead to depression or upset, the idea is that your therapist works with you to break that chain of thoughts. And if you're somebody who has a phobia, if you're scared of certain things, A long used and very effective tactic is what they call exposure therapy, right? The idea is that if you're scared of something, instead of giving you a trigger warning about a snake, we actually put you in a room with a snake, a safe snake, right? And then we let you be exposed to the snake, and then you're less afraid of it, right? So the idea is that we are creating a generation of people who, it's sort of the equivalent, of why kids who are upper class tended to get polio more before Jonas Salk's vaccine. Because they didn't spend any time in the street at all. They were never dirty at all. And so once they were exposed to the polio virus, then they were immediately affected by it. They had no immune buildup. If you live in a world where there's no immune buildup, and then you get out into the real world where there are people who disagree with you, you're not going to react either well or in healthy fashion. And all of this actually makes people evil. It does. It makes them more aggressive. It makes them evil. It makes them more likely to commit acts of violence. It makes them more likely to be fascists. Roy Baumeister is a professor of psychology at Columbia, and he wrote a book called Evil, Inside Human Violence and Cruelty, and he said, hypersensitive people who often think their pride is being assaulted are potentially dangerous. Even when a neutral observer would conclude that no serious provocation occurred, it is still important to recognize that, in the perpetrator's own view, he or she was merely responding to an attack. And we see this in our politics all the time. People who are very oversensitive and think they're always being attacked are the most likely to be the people who are very aggressive. Self-appointed victimhood, dangerous stuff for individuals, dangerous stuff for America. 40% of young people, people aged 18 to 34, according to November 2015 Pew poll, 40% of people in our age bracket believe that the federal government should prosecute people for speech that offends people of racial minority status. Prosecute them, put them in jail. This would involve repeal of the First Amendment. On college campuses, that number is well above 70%. So this is scary stuff. And we're talking about the end of freedom as we know it. So here's the reality. America is the best place to live in the history of humanity. I mean, not just on the planet right now. It is the best place in the history of the world. And one of the reasons it's the best place in the history of the world is because your actions correlate very highly with your level of success. That's what freedom means. There's no intervening force. What you do is going to result in the results that you get. And part of that is that you are also exposed. Part of that freedom involves being exposed to other ideas and things that you may not like and things that you may not agree with. And that's okay. What happens when these two values are simultaneously attacked? What happens when the value of equality of opportunity is attacked on behalf of equality of outcome? And what happens when free speech is attacked on behalf of the feelings regime? That's when you end up in a very dangerous space. Not a safe space, but a very unsafe space for basic American principles. A space that is going to lead to more unhappiness, more lives ruined, more people acting irresponsibly, more people acting in totalitarian fashion. All we have to do, it turns out, to get along with each other in this society is treat each other decently and recognize that sometimes we're going to disagree, and that's okay. If this is too hard for you, get out. And get out now, seriously, because it turns out that these are foundational principles, and if we don't hold those in common, we literally hold nothing in common. So we should be able to come together around those things, if nothing else. Thanks so much. Happy to take your questions.
If you would like to ask a question, please come down either on this side or over there by Josh. And please try and minimize the number of declarative sentences in your question. Ask a question and please sit back down.
Hi Ben, thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate you opening up this dialogue on someone who disagrees with you. So I'm happy that you're listening to pass this sentence. Just as like a way of background, I'm Jewish. My grandparents on my mother's side were both like in concentration camps during the Holocaust. So appreciate your rendition or talking about fascism. But I guess what I'm wondering is like if microaggressions are used as a means of suppressing ideas and debates about like blacks, who like millions of which were enslaved in this country and involved in like a transatlantic slave trade. Do you think anti-Semitism is a claim? Do you think anti-Semitism is a claim that's used to detract from like real criticism of the state of Israel or of like other situations like that?
It can be. I mean, it depends on the criticism. So not every, as I said, not every accusation of racism is ill-founded, right? Not every accusation of anti-Semitism is ill-founded. You know, if the idea is that you disagree with a particular Israeli policy and that's anti-Semitism, not necessarily. If the idea is that you believe that in the moral conflict between Israel and its neighbors, that Israel is in the wrong and that its neighbors are in the right, then, which effectively means that you don't back the existence of the state of Israel, then that is anti-Semitism. So it depends on the nature the claim being made. But of course, I mean, there are people who are going to claim anti-Semitism when there is none. There are going to be people who claim racism when there is none. That doesn't mean, however, that every claim of anti-Semitism or racism is false. This is actually one of the divisions that I have with some colleagues of mine, people like Milo Yiannopoulos, right? And Milo and I are friendly, but one of the things that I object to with Milo is that Milo seems to imply that anytime anyone says racist ever, or anti-Semitism ever, that that's illegitimate. And I don't think that that's correct. He says that he's just violated, so when people say things that are actually racist or actually anti-Semitic, he says, well, it's good because they're violating taboos. Well, violating taboo for the sake of violating taboo isn't always a great thing. I mean, sometimes what you're saying is actually evil, right? Sometimes you can say evil things. So the answer to your question is, it depends on the claim that's being made, and I evaluate them on a case-by-case basis.
Hi, Mr. Shapiro. I'm a student at McQuaid Jesuit, which is a local Catholic school. I've gone to Catholic school all my life, so I personally haven't experienced this. But I asked one of my friends who goes to a public school, in fact, several of them, just out of curiosity, how many people pray at your school? And they told me, no one prays at our school. You can't have religion in public school. Now, I'm a high school student surrounded by many, assumably smarter people than me, but as far as I'm aware, the First Amendment says freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. So do you not agree with me that or do you believe that the public schools have not upheld the First Amendment in freedom of religion because you effectively cannot find religion, or at least the common conception is that in public schools there is no religion?
Well, the attempt to ban all religion is no better than an attempt to ban atheism in a school. I mean, I believe that freedom of religion includes freedom not to believe. But I don't believe that that means that the school is obligated, for example, not to put up a Ten Commandments display, which is a part of our cultural heritage and the foundation for all Western law, or that the school can't allow people independent time to pray. I don't see a problem with that. If you don't want to pray, nobody's forcing you to pray. There's no force involved. So as long as the government is not compelling something, here's my view of the government generally. The government is a giant shooting people machine. And so because the government is a giant shooting people machine, you have to be very careful about when you use the government, because compulsion is generally not something that I like. So as long as people are not being compelled to do anything, then people can do whatever they want. If the school wants to have time for people to pray, I don't see the problem. And as long as they're not punishing people for not praying, then I really don't see the problem, obviously.
Hello, my name's Cameron. I'm also a high school student. It's nice to actually not hear you over a fire alarm.
Well, thank you all for that. I appreciate it.
My question is, for people who understand that abortion is morally wrong,
Yes.
but they don't see a reason how to stop it, they would say that, people would just go under the coat hanger abortions and women would suffer from it, so on and so forth. And you have a solution, if you were to ban abortion, that could affect both sides.
Well, I mean, the fact is that anytime you ban anything, there's going to be illegal activity that involves that thing. That doesn't mean that the question for pro-lifers is how many lives you're saving. And we ban murder is banned, and people kill each other all the time. So that doesn't mean that I'm going to have a solution for the woman who insists on killing her child. If she insists on killing her child, or an abortionist insists on killing her child, presumably when it comes to the abortion for pro-lifers is a criminal act and a deeply immoral one. So, decisions have consequences. If you choose to act outside the bounds of morality, it is not my job to protect you from the consequences of acting outside the bounds of morality. And if you are like me and you feel that abortion is deeply immoral and indeed a grave moral evil for which the United States bears a heavy burden, then there are consequences to that. I can have sympathy for somebody's individual plight, but also have more sympathy for the idea that you don't get to kill a child because of it.
Thank you.
So you were saying that facts don't care about your feelings, and I was struck recently about how, especially with when it comes to journalism over the past 30 or so years has become a lot more partisan. And I was just wondering, I was thinking back to how that, the partisan press era of the 18th century, it's very similar to how it is today.
Right.
Do you agree with that? Do you think that's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing. And the reason I think it's a good thing is because I believe that everybody's view is shaped by their values. Everybody. So the idea that Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather or Sam Donaldson, these people were great objective purveyors of truth is nonsense. They were all leftists. It's just they masqueraded as objective purveyors of truth. I actually had this conversation with Sam Donaldson at one point. It didn't go well. He was at the 2012 Republican National Convention, and he was doing his radio broadcast, which is now a leftist opinion broadcast. And I went up to him, I spotted him by his eyebrows from all the way across the room. Legitimately the only man in America with heavier eyebrows than me. And I went up to him and I said, you know, you do a leftist opinion show, did you hold these same opinions when you were a quote-unquote objective journalist? And he said, yes, I did. And I said, well, then why did you lie to everybody and claim that you were objective? And he said, what, you think you're better than me? And I said, yes, I do. So I would prefer honesty up front. I'm a conservative. I mean, if you couldn't tell, gang, I'm a conservative. And that means that if you don't believe what I'm saying, you can go check my facts and you can see whether you believe me or not. I would prefer that everybody be upfront about their biases. I think that one of the great problems with journalism, I have more of a problem, for example, with CNN than I do with MSNBC. Everybody knows MSNBC is on the left, right? They are what they are. CNN pretends at objectivity, and that's a lie. Objectivity is a lie. It doesn't exist. So, yeah, the era of partisan journalism back when the founders were around, I think is more reflective of reality than the faux consensus journalism that existed in the 50s and 60s.
Hi, thank you for coming. So my question kind of stems from your claim earlier that, especially pertaining to race, that we're all on a level playing field. I'm an economics major here, and so my question comes from my experiences here in our pretty conservative economics department, which I've loved being a part of. So you said that, it's how, and probably relating to how we're a capitalist society, but some will fall by the wayside, some will succeed, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't pertain to race, it doesn't pertain to anything. And I think that your claim that it's inherently racist to take anyone's race into account, I think that might be true in an ideal. Above values. Yeah, above values. I think that might be true in an ideal that we might shoot for, but I'm just not totally sure we're there yet. And I think the most important example for me, especially because markets are a really important thing, is that access to credit was very limited based on race until through the 1980s.
You're talking redlining.
I'm talking about redlining. I'm also talking about there's redlining specifically, but in other instances. So access to credit, one of the most important things to building up wealth and attaining wealth. So if that was predicated on race, and there's only been about a generation between that, so what's this level playing field? Because
the level playing field now is if you're born now, you're an individual born now, right? You're our age, right? I'm 32. You're 32 or younger, right? So you're somebody who grew up really. I mean, I was 6 when the 80s ended, right? So you grew up in the 90s, 2000s. What decisions do you make that are being impacted significantly by race? What I mean by that is when you go to apply for a credit card, if you have good credit, you are going to get a credit card. If you have bad credit, you are not going to get a good credit card. The question is and then the question becomes, okay, so let's say, for example, let's take your entire premise. Let's take your premise that their parents were poor, and they're more likely to be poor, and they're more likely to have bad credit, although credit is really a reflection of the decisions that you make, you don't inherit your parents' credit. So it's really about the decisions that you make, right? So, but let's even assume the false premise that you inherit your parents' credit for some reason, that you were impacted by all of this. The problem is that the federal government then, instead of evening the playing field by saying, okay, we're going to get out of this completely, instead what the federal government does is they go overboard to the other side. So they favor race above values again the other way. What they say is, okay, now we're going to grant subprime mortgage loans, for example, to people who are undeserving buyers, right, who don't have proper credit ratings. And that, of course, results in a subprime meltdown when it turns out that people with subprime credit ratings tend to default more often, right? So the answer is that there's never an answer better than make the rules even for everyone. And the left, their solution to institutional racism, after shouting institutional racism, is always more institutional racism. It's always some sort of institutional measure designed to benefit one group above another, and it ends up being counterproductive. So that's my problem. I'm not going to look. Is there a history of racism in America? Of course. If you want to talk about actual institutional racism, Jim Crow was actual institutional racism, obviously. Right? And there are institutions that were racist for literally 200 years in America. But that doesn't mean that right now, if you're going to talk about institutional racism, you have to talk to me, number one, about how racism impacts the individual now, and then what is the measure that you have for fixing that? And I don't hear that ever. I just hear somebody's poor, it must be institutional racism. So it's not practical, in other words.
Hi. Okay, so My question is, can you just do me a favor and define the terms in your definition,
Sure.
white privilege, microaggression, and trigger warnings? Because it seems that we have very different definitions of it, and yours seem to be kind of one-dimensional and simplistic, which makes your arguments agreeable, yes, on the surface,
Yes.
but not agreeable on the surface, yes, but not really anything more than basic.
Okay. Well, since you're already critiquing them, why don't you give me your definition? We can discuss that. That seems more productive.
No, actually I just want to hear yours because that's how your whole, I want to know what your argument is based upon, and your definitions are what matters here, not mine, so please continue.
Okay, so I'll give mine and then we can trade if you want. And we can have a full discussion. It'd be awesome. So my definition of white privilege is that America was founded on racism, and that it is inherent in the Constitution of the United States and our legal system, and it is unremovable from the United States and our legal system. It is bound up in our economics, it's bound up in our intellectual system, it's bound up in all of the institutions that surround us. And therefore individual failings are largely due, or group failings, if there's disparity between groups, group failings are due to these institutional biases that have long predated the people who are born today, as opposed to the fault or responsibility of the individual today. Do you find that deeply wrong or unfair?
I think that's very one-dimensional, but can you please go on to microaggression? No, I'm just curious. I don't want to.
Sure. Yeah. No. You can label it whatever you want. I was hoping to get your definition also, so we can actually come to consensus if we could. I mean, that'd be more interesting to me. But if you want me just to define things, okay, dictionary time. Okay. So microaggressions, according to Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff in The Atlantic, are largely defined as implicit statements that we make that offend other people without even knowing it. And they're based subjectively. They're not based objectively. So I can say something to you, like if I ask you where you're from, right? You can take that as a microaggression, particularly if you're from a foreign country, because you may be thinking that I'm thinking that you are a foreigner, for example. And to me, subjectivity in interpretation is significantly less important or decent for a society in which we actually have to talk to each other than objective meanings of words and statements.
Personally, I do agree with that definition to an extent. The comment that you made about having microaggressions allow someone to put their hands on them or allow someone to act negatively or aggressively or physically, I do disagree with that because I think that's taking a jump away from what microaggressions actually mean.
So then what are microaggressions? So instead, why don't you just say, that offends me?
Which is perfectly fine, but I think that what microaggressions mean, you are taking it another step outside of what the common definition is, or at least the definition that I may use. I just think that we're
you're right that I'm extending the logic to what campuses actually do, namely punish people for microaggressions or take measures against them. So you may agree that something's a microaggression, there shouldn't be measures against it. I'm suggesting that we come to an agreement now, you and I, that the language of microaggressions ought to go away, and instead we'll just call them subjectively offensive statements. Because that's more accurate. Microaggression implies there's something objectively aggressive about what I am saying to you if I say something to you that you don't like.
Well, I don't want to take too much time.
It's interesting, so I'm glad you're here.
I will step by that one because I just, for now. Next one is trigger warnings.
Okay, so trigger warnings are, again, based on the idea that I'm going to say something to you that is, were you here? Yes.
Definition of it, because I think we have two different definitions of what all these terms mean.
The reason that I'm finding this conversation mildly unproductive is you're not giving me your definition so we can actually reach something here. Again, I'm happy to define things until the cows come home, but what I enjoy doing is actually figuring out, if you think I'm wrong, you tell me where I'm wrong, and then we can discuss where I'm wrong or not. That seems more productive to me. Wouldn't it be more productive to you? I mean, as opposed to me just saying
okay, so it would be more productive, but this is a large, it's a large group of people and I want to speak.
We have a long line.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So, thank you.
Again, folks, if you want to email me, if you want to email, my email address, if you want to have these discussions in more length, is bshapiro@dailywire.com. I'm always happy to have long conversations as time permits to do these things.
Thank you.
Hi Ben, thank you for coming to this Liberal State. I'm a huge fan, so I'm really glad you're here.
Oh, thank you.
So
my fan, he's here.
So I'm conservative, and like you, I'm a never Trumper, but I definitely want to vote next election. And if Trump wins the election, I I think the conservative vote should consolidate and get behind a single person so that we can show the party and the rest of America how much of us really are, that we're a force of reckoning.
Right, so you're talking about like a third-party candidate if Trump wins the nomination?
Sure.
Mhm.
Should we vote for? What should we do?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a third-party candidate I find palatable, I'll vote third-party. As you say, I'm a never Trump person also. As I said on Megyn Kelly's show last week, I think that Trump is a smoking garbage heap of human debris. I legitimately think that. I'm happy to expound on that blank. But I understand this is a state where Trump is actually more popular than most other states. But in sum, you're wrong. So in any case, the idea would be that we get behind some sort of third-party candidate. Third-party candidate is going to win, but I think it's important for conservatives to draw distinctions between conservatism and the nationalist populism of Donald Trump, which has very little to do with conservatism.
Hello, Mr. Shapiro. I'm a fan. Thanks for being here. My question is about cultural relativism. It seems to me that the left really likes the idea of cultural relativism. And I know this, not from this college, by the way, but in high school. I grew up in I went to an urban high school, Jersey City, and I was engaged in a debate with one of my teachers about Western values. I'm originally Arabic, but you know, I think the West is the greatest civilization that's ever that human beings ever created, post-Renaissance, I think. And I was defending property rights against a more communal way, and I said, she asked me, where do your views on property rights come from? And I said, well, I have Aristotle and John Locke, and she dismissed them as dead white males right away. Two genius dead white males, doesn't matter.
Which, by the way, is absolute reductionism. Don't argue with the identity, argue with the idea. But,
I know, because what if I went to my physics class and said Isaac Newton was a dead white male? We should.
Right, Albert Einstein, dead white male.
But how do you think the cultural relativism relates to their attack on free speech? I feel they're related. I can't put my finger on it.
No, I mean, it's because the idea is the diversity of values means that all values have to be treated equally, even if certain values absolutely suck. And it turns out that certain values absolutely suck. All values are not created equal. Some values are bad. Right? There are three types of diversity, and I really only covered two in this particular speech. There's diversity of thought, and there's diversity of values, which is actually different from diversity of thought. We can have a bevy of different thoughts within the rubric of freedom of speech, for example. But diversity of values about freedom of speech itself is actually not productive. If my idea is that freedom of speech is good, and your idea is that freedom of speech is bad, that is actually not good for the community. And what studies have found, there's a good book by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone, and he talks in there about, he's a very far left guy, Robert Putnam, and what he said is that diversity of values actually results typically in more fragmented communities, more protest marches. The diversity is richness routine only applies where you have a common goal in mind as far as what the rules of society, what freedom looks like. And diversity of values that encompasses actual values that are evil is not a worthwhile diversity. So not all diversity is worthwhile diversity. And everybody agrees with this, right? I mean, if you have a room of three, that doesn't mean that you have to shut people up. You know, I think that the best answer to bad speech is more speech, not less speech. But there are certain values that are just evil. There are certain values that are just wrong. And the values of neo-Nazis are evil. These are evil values. And you can say them, but I'm going to call you out on it. And so the cultural relativism you see on campus, I find really disheartening, especially because the only reason that we even get to have these conversations on campus in the first place is, as you put it, because of the legacy of thoughts from dead white Western men.
How many more of these do you want to take? We have quite a line.
Well, I mean, we can go for another few.
Hey Ben, George, Jr. here.